Elliot returned to his hometown after a long absence. The city that had once been a place of childhood memories and happy days now seemed foreign and eerie to him. As he stepped off the train at the old station, he noticed that the homes and streets that had once been bustling and well-kept appeared empty and abandoned. Buildings were covered in a layer of dirt and dust, and the streets were deserted as if the place had undergone dreadful changes. Elliot looked around, feeling a mix of nostalgia and unease. Memories of his childhood spent with Lucas, his older brother, burned in his soul. They used to play on these streets, and the city was filled with laughter and joy. But now the city seemed devoid of life, as if its soul had been drained. Elliot walked along the streets where he used to be every day, and felt an indescribable sense of longing. House windows were boarded up, and shop windows were shattered. It seemed like the city had been engulfed by some sinister atmosphere, as if the place were cursed. A few passers-by, whom Elliot encountered, looked at him with displeasure and avoided eye contact. The city had lost its usual appearance, and Elliot understood that he needed to unravel the mystery that enshrouded his hometown. Returning to his home, he began to study records of unexplained events that occurred after his departure, and tried to find answers to the questions that troubled his soul. In his house, filled with family photographs, Elliot found portraits with Lucas. Lucas had always been his older brother and childhood hero. He remembered how they explored the city together and dreamed of the future. Lucas was Elliot's protector and mentor, instilling in him a love for adventure and exploration. But Lucas was no longer with him. Elliot had lost his brother, and his return to his hometown was a reminder that he was now alone. Mixed feelings of grief and determination consumed him. He resolved to solve the mystery of the gruesome murders that had gripped the city, to honor his brother's memory, and to restore the city to its former life. Several days after his return, a horrifying murder occurred. Elliot read about it in the local newspaper and decided to visit the crime scene. John's house, a local resident, was the site of the first murder in this gruesome series. The house looked grim and abandoned. Elliot knocked on the door, but there was no response. He entered, and his gaze fell upon a horrifying sight. John lay on the floor in the room, his eyes swollen, and his face distorted with terror. In his hand, he held a shattered mirror, and there were shards of glass all around. In the final moments of his life, he clearly experienced fear and dread. Elliot examined the crime scene and felt a chill inside him. It was the terrifying beginning of his investigation, and he realized that the city concealed a dreadful secret that needed to be unraveled. Elliot began actively investigating and gathering details about these mysterious murders. In his hands were articles from the local newspaper, dating back to the past few months. He noticed that the deaths with swollen eyes were linked to mirrors and occurred with alarming regularity. He questioned the local residents and discovered that many of them had started avoiding mirrors, fearing they could be the next victims. Fear and confusion gripped the townspeople, and no one knew how to explain these horrific deaths. Elliot started compiling details of each murder and identified commonalities among them. All the victims were healthy individuals until they looked into a mirror. He realized that events in the city were following a pattern and decided that it was time to delve into the investigation. With each new murder, fear spread among the local residents. Many of them began avoiding mirrors, covering them up, and turning away to avoid meeting their own gaze. Rumors of a curse circulated through the city, and even those who typically didn't believe in the supernatural started to worry. Elliot heard stories of how some local residents claimed to have seen strange shadows and heard whispers in mirrors before the murders. Fear and confusion reigned in the city. Elliot decided that he needed to dig deeper into this case and find out what lay behind these murders and the curse. With each passing day, Elliot became increasingly convinced that his town harbored a profound mystical mystery. He began delving into archives and visiting libraries in search of information about similar cases in the past. His research led him to numerous old legends and stories about spirits and curses associated with mirrors. It all seemed unbelievable, but Elliot started to believe that the answers to the murder mystery might be tied to the mystical history of his town. Realizing that the local authorities were unable to solve this, Elliot decided to launch his own investigation. Armed with records and knowledge of past cases of similar murders, he began scrutinizing every aspect of the puzzle. His determination grew with each new discovery, and he knew that he would have to confront the unknown to restore peace and safety to his town. Elliot prepared to hunt the shadowy maniac, hoping to find answers and bring solace to his town. Elliot never ceased working on the investigation. He followed each murder, interviewed local residents, and examined every detail and circumstance that could lead him to the maniac. Moving through the city, he searched for clues and tried to understand how the victims and mirrors could be connected. Each new victim brought new enigmas and questions. Elliot had to act swiftly and skillfully to prevent further deaths. But despite his efforts, the maniac remained an elusive and mysterious adversary who continued to claim lives. Fear and terror gripped the city. The townspeople lived in constant apprehension, and every mirror became an object of fear. Elliot understood that he needed to act quickly, search for evidence, and try to understand the maniac's motives. But within him, hope also grew. Hope that he could unravel the murder mystery, find the maniac, and end this nightmare. He knew that his brother Lucas would have been proud of his determination and courage. Thus, Elliot continued to battle the mystery that had enveloped his town, moving forward with the hope of solving the puzzle and restoring peace to his beloved hometown. Elliot began his investigation by meticulously analyzing all available data on the crimes. He compiled dossiers on each victim, studying their biographies and the circumstances of their deaths. He noted that all the murders occurred in different parts of the city, but they all shared one common trait: swollen eyes of the victims. The next step was to examine the primary evidence and testimonies. Elliot studied the crime scenes, trying to find traces of the maniac. He discovered that most of the victims had glass shards on their bodies, indicating broken mirrors. He also noticed that some mirrors were old and covered in dust, while others were new. Elliot started interviewing local residents to gather more information about the crimes. He learned that many of them had heard strange sounds and seen shadowy figures near the crime scenes. However, no one could provide specific details or describe the maniac. Elliot attempted to find connections between the victims. He found that some of them were linked through work or friendship, but he couldn't find clear motives for the murders. This only deepened the mystery of what was happening. With each passing day, Elliot developed his own theories about the maniac. He speculated that the maniac could be a town resident with a good knowledge of its territory. He also pondered a possible connection between the maniac and an old mystical legend of the town. Elliot discovered several cryptic messages left by the maniac at the crime scenes. These messages were written on the walls with mirrors and contained strange symbols and sayings. Elliot began analyzing them, hoping to find some key to unravel the mystery. Unexpectedly, several new murders occurred in the city. Elliot had to act quickly and coordinate his efforts with the local police. The new deaths intensified fear and anxiety among the local residents, and their hope of solving this puzzle was fading. Public pressure on the local police continued to mount. Elliot decided to collaborate with the police, providing them with his data and analyses. Together with them, he hoped for a fresh perspective on this mystery and the opportunity to combine efforts to apprehend the maniac. At each murder scene, Elliot carefully examined the surroundings, hoping to find clues that could lead him to the maniac. Elliot meticulously inspected the shattered fragments of mirrors left in chaos. Suddenly, his gaze caught a glimmer of light on a small piece of glass. He delicately picked it up and discovered a microscopic trace of blood hidden among the shards. It was the first crucial piece of evidence, indicating that the maniac wasn't invisible and had a physical form. In some of the houses, Elliot found letters hidden in various places belonging to the victims. These were letters from the maniac, written in red ink on a black background. Upon closer examination, Elliot noticed that the ink revealed letters only at a specific viewing angle. After many days of diligent investigation and analyzing the evidence, Elliot began to see a clearer picture of how the maniac operated and what kind of trail he left behind. This part tells of his breakthrough in the investigation and his initial attempts to identify the maniac. Elliot noticed that the patterns left on the walls of the murder scenes resembled symbols he had seen at the first crime scene. He began comparing them and found a similarity. This was a pivotal moment. He realized that the maniac was leaving messages at his crime scenes. The letters found at the murder scenes also came into Elliot's focus. He closely examined the peculiar ink and tried changing his viewing angle, as was done in the message. Suddenly, a new line of text appeared before him that he hadn't noticed before. It read, "Lyrtensia, a voice without eyes." These were the words the maniac had left in the letter, and Elliot knew this was the maniac's name. Elliot decided to revisit old materials he and his brother Lucas had found. He went through old records, photos, and notes until he stumbled upon one of the books they had discovered. It mentioned the name Lyrtensia again, and its connection to the world of mirrors. Elliot began investigating this legend. He discovered it was an ancient tale of a sinister entity that lived within mirrors and saw a way to escape their world. This legend included sacrifices and rituals associated with mirrors. Elliot realized that the name Lyrtensia was linked to the maniac, but its mystery remained deep. Now he had a name, but the challenge was to find a way to stop this terrifying entity and prevent further murders. Elliot was resolute in his determination to conclude this investigation and put an end to the horror that had gripped the city. Elliot began his investigation by thoroughly examining the local antique shop where similar mirrors might have been sold. The shop owner shared information about a couple of antique mirrors that had been sold a few weeks ago. Elliot obtained information about the buyers and set off in pursuit. He found the former owner of one of the mirrors, who recounted that his wife had started behaving strangely after acquiring the mirror. The woman claimed to see a dark figure within it. This intrigued Elliot, and he decided to learn more about the mirrors. On his way to the factory, Elliot made a horrifying discovery: a new murder scene. The victim was surrounded by shattered mirrors. Elliot felt uneasy, knowing that the maniac was close. He continued his journey quickly, aware that time was running out. Mirrors had become not only the key to solving the mystery, but also a symbol of deadly danger. The trail led Elliot to an old abandoned factory where glass for mirrors had once been manufactured. He decided to explore this place, hoping to find information about the mirrors and their connection to the maniac. In the basement of the factory, Elliot discovered a hidden space filled with rare and antique mirrors. Strange symbols and ritual markings were engraved on each of them. Elliot began to photograph and record them, realizing that this could be the key to unraveling the mystery. Elliot began to suspect that the maniac had some connection to these artifacts. He wondered how the mirrors allowed the maniac to kill through them. This puzzle became his primary focus in the investigation. Inside the factory, Elliot began searching rooms and corridors. He inspected every mirror, every room and found traces of the maniac everywhere. Fear and tension made his heart race. He noticed that some mirrors were particularly old and looked like relics from the past. This was a breakthrough, and he felt that he was getting closer to the source of this dark secret. Elliot continued to follow the maniac's trail, hoping to pinpoint his location. Suddenly, he found himself in an abandoned room filled with old and dirty mirrors. The mirrors reflected horrifying and distorted figures. Elliot surveyed the room, and his gaze landed on one of the mirrors. In that moment, the reflection in the mirror changed, transforming into the sinister face of the maniac. The maniac, it seemed, was inside the mirror itself and began moving towards Elliot, rapidly closing the distance between them. Elliot, knowing he had no time to hesitate, grabbed something heavy from a nearby shelf and forcefully hurled it at the mirror. The sound of shattering glass pierced the room, and the maniac vanished from the mirror, leaving Elliot gasping and weakened but alive. Elliot shattered the mirror, and it became his salvation from the cunning maniac who had been hiding in the world of mirrors and their reflections. The sound of breaking glass once again cut through the darkness of the factory. Elliot felt a surge of adrenaline inside him. He knew the maniac was close, and he was running out of time. Elliot's heart pounded so loudly that he could almost hear it in his ears. He glanced back, but in the darkness, there was nothing to be seen except eerie emptiness. Elliot rushed forward through the old corridors, desperately trying to escape this nightmarish trap. He sprinted without looking back, his footsteps echoing off the abandoned walls. Dust and cobwebs seemed like his enemies, and fear, like a shadow, pursued him. Occasionally, he glanced back, but the maniac remained invisible. A sliver of bright sky at the end of the corridor appeared as his salvation. Elliot burst out of the factory, inhaling fresh air as if he had escaped from a nightmare. His breathing was rapid, and his heart continued to beat like a drum, but he knew he had no time to rest. His battle with the maniac had only just begun, and he had to find a way to stop this madness. Elliot remained outside the abandoned factory, his breathing heavy and uneven. His eyes burned with determination. He realized that the factory was not the source of the horrific events, but the mirrors, within which danger lurked, still existed. There was no time for hesitation, and he decided to take action. Elliot surveyed the surroundings and found a wooden board, the remnants of a hammer, and a couple of empty gasoline cans that someone had left here many years ago. He understood that these might be his only tools in the fight against the maniac in the mirrors. With 3 gasoline cans and a board in hand, Elliot resolutely returned to the factory. He was prepared to destroy all the mirrors and annihilate their inner workings. Elliot began smashing the mirrors one by one. The sound of shattering glass echoed throughout the factory, creating a chilling melody. The maniac's face ceased to flicker in the reflections, and Elliot could feel the haunting presence dissipating. After all the mirrors were shattered, Elliot poured gasoline onto the frames and surrounds of the mirrors and set them ablaze. Flames enveloped every reflection, and the mirrors vanished within the fire. Once the last mirror was destroyed, Elliot stepped out of the factory, standing at a distance and watching as the fire consumed the remnants of this nightmarish ordeal. His breathing became calmer, but he knew it was just the beginning. The purification of the factory from the mirrors left him convinced that the maniac who had haunted the city through these mysterious reflections must be deciphered and stopped. With a smile on his face, Elliot left the abandoned factory, free from the horror that had haunted him for so long. The night had turned clear, and the stars in the sky seemed like bright points of hope. He felt that he had taken a significant step toward cleansing the city from fear. Returning to his home, Elliot sat on the old couch and contemplated. He knew that many mirrors had been destroyed, and this was a significant success. The city needed to be free from fear, and Elliot hoped he had achieved that. However, the next morning, his confidence was shattered. News of new murders involving mirrors struck him like a lightning bolt. Elliot felt that the darkness and horror lurking within the mirrors were deeper and more complex than he had anticipated. His battle with the maniac had only just begun, and he had to find a way to stop this evil before it claimed more innocent lives. With this thought in mind, Elliot set out once again, ready to uncover the dark secrets hidden behind the reflections. Elliot received news of 2 new murders committed using mirrors. It was a heavy blow to the city, and Elliot understood that he had to act swiftly. Arriving at the crime scene, he saw police officers and paramedics working frantically. He navigated through the crowd, clearing a path for them, and headed toward the secured area. Through the crowd, his eyes fixated on the shattered mirrors and blood, and he realized that the maniac was continuing his killings. Sleepless nights had become the norm for Elliot. His life was consumed by relentless searching and analyzing of clues. He worked around the clock, slept little, and subsisted on sporadic snacks, but even exhaustion couldn't stop him. He knew that every minute could cost someone their life. In his quest for answers, Elliot revisited old materials and notes he had discovered alongside Lucas. He reread them with heightened attention, hoping to find clues or mentions of the mirror maniac. Old manuscripts and writings from mystics seemed to finally reveal their secrets, and Elliot meticulously recorded any information he deemed useful. Elliot spent days delving into the city's history and realized that mirror-related murders had occurred in the past. He began tracking old cases and tried to identify commonalities between past events and the current killings. He sought the assistance of historians and longtime residents, striving to gather all the puzzle pieces that might help him unravel this mystery. Elliot decided to talk to the local residents, especially those who had lived in the city for many years. He hoped that the longtime inhabitants might know something about the mirror maniac that wasn't recorded in history. During a conversation with one of the city's oldest residents, Elliot suddenly heard screams coming from a nearby house. His heart raced in sync with the screams, and without hesitation, he rushed to the scene, forgetting everything except the urgent need to solve this mysterious puzzle and stop the killer. Elliot instantly darted toward the source of the screams, his heart pounding so fast that he could barely catch his breath. The door of the house was partially open, and he burst inside without fear or hesitation. Amidst the screeching and creaking of doors, Elliot stormed into the hallway, where chaos and panic reigned. Shattered mirror fragments were strewn everywhere, and glass shards sparkled on the floor like diamonds in the sand. In the dim light of the fixtures, he saw the bewildered faces of local residents standing in various parts of the room. On the floor lay the lifeless body of a woman, her eyes wide open in terror. Elliot was too late to save her. In that moment, he felt the bitterness of defeat. He slowly examined the crime scene, knowing that even in this horrific moment, every detail could be crucial. In the corner of the room, he noticed something strange, a small mirror covered in dirt and blood. Elliot picked it up and examined it closely. On its surface, he discerned the reflection of the mirror maniac's face, grinning, and then it immediately disappeared. Elliot wiped the mirror clean and carefully packed it, knowing that it could be a key piece of evidence. There was nothing else in the room that could point to the maniac. He remained in this eerie house, waiting for the police to arrive so he could hand over the clues that might lead to the capture of this inhuman killer. While the police interviewed witnesses, Elliot returned home and began corresponding with experts in paranormal phenomena and mystical researchers. He needed to understand how this mirror maniac functioned in the mirrors and how to defeat him. Elliot sent them photos of the mirror, along with a description of the events and details related to the murders. Over the next few days, Elliot delved into the personal connections and histories of the townspeople. He spoke with people, conducted interviews, and even scoured social media for any mentions of mirrors or the maniac. He was persistent and tirelessly sought information that could shed light on this mysterious case. Elliot delved into the city's old archives, hoping to find clues or records related to mirrors and the maniac. He studied dusty documents, flipped through yellowed newspaper pages, and read the accounts of longtime residents. Suddenly, in one of the old newspaper clippings, he found an article describing a murder where the victim had a mirror in their hands. It was the first written document linking this horrifying incident to the city's past. While researching the old materials, Elliot once again came across the name of the mirror maniac, Lyrtensia, but he couldn't find any details about them. This name now became a symbol of evil for him, one he had to defeat. With each passing day, Elliot realized he was approaching the final battle with the mirror maniac. He prepared for this moment by gathering weapons and information, knowing that the confrontation would be dangerous but inevitable. He studied methods and strategies that could help him defeat the maniac and purge the evil from his city. Elliot decided to return to the place where this terrifying story began, the house where he first encountered the maniac. On his way there, he felt the looming threat growing heavier, but he pressed on, determined to solve this mystery. Suddenly, he discovered a mention of a purification ritual in the old records. He realized this could be the key to stopping the maniac, and decided to find more details about the ritual. Elliot went to the city library, where he began researching ancient books and manuscripts related to rituals. He hoped to find information on how to banish the maniac from the world of mirrors. During his search, he encountered mysterious texts and symbols that could prove useful. Elliot began contacting people involved in mystical research and purification rituals. He spoke with magicians, occultists, and mystics, hoping to find answers. He encountered some eccentric researchers who claimed that the mirror maniac was the result of an ancient ritual. Returning home after another day of research, Elliot noticed that his reflection in the mirror began to distort and transform into a horrifying image of the maniac. Fear gripped him, and he realized that the maniac would attempt to kill him right now. At midnight, Elliot sat in his room, studying records and photographs of mirrors. Suddenly, his gaze fell on the mirror opposite him. Instead of his reflection, he saw the face of the maniac, grinning and slowly approaching the surface of the glass. Elliot noticed that his eyes had started to bleed. Elliot decided not to waste any time, and while the mirror killer was in his home, he performed the banishment ritual. Strange events began to unfold in his room. Elliot closed the windows and doors of his room, creating an atmosphere of isolation. On the floor, he drew a circle of salt to establish a protective barrier against malevolent forces. On the table in front of him lay candles and ritual objects that he had carefully prepared. He lit the candles and began to recite the ancient text he had found in one of the old books. Each word sounded ominous and mysterious in the silence of his room. The candles flickered, casting an eerie glow. As Elliot focused on the ritual, he heard strange sounds emanating from the wall. It resembled rustling and whispers. He realized that the maniac was trying to disrupt his efforts. Elliot continued to recite the text, but the tension in the room grew. The candles started to flicker, and his shadow on the wall grew darker. The air became charged with energy, and he could sense the presence of the maniac drawing closer. Suddenly, dark hallucinatory visions began to flash before Elliot's eyes. He saw the maniac slowly approaching him amidst the mirrors. Elliot clenched his teeth and kept reciting, ignoring the horrifying visions. Elliot felt a surge of powerful energy beginning to bear down on the maniac. The mirrors in the room flickered as if coming to life, and the maniac started to struggle against the forces attempting to banish him. The strength of the ritual intensified, and Elliot sensed the maniac weakening. Mirrors cracked and shattered, releasing ominous darkness from within them. Finally, the maniac disappeared, and the room returned to its normal state. Elliot, exhausted but victorious, sat down on the floor, realizing that the maniac would no longer pose a threat to the city. The candles that had previously illuminated the room went out one by one, leaving only a faint haze. Elliot looked at the extinguished candles, feeling the weight of fatigue settling over him. After banishing the maniac, Elliot surveyed the room. The mirrors were no longer a threat, but they remained shattered and broken. Elliot understood that the city was now safe, but he knew that his battle with this evil might not be over. The city began to recover from the horrors, and the residents gradually returned to their normal lives. Elliot, even though he had expelled the maniac from the mirrors, knew that his fight against this evil might not yet be finished. He felt that there was still much horror ahead of him, waiting for him to confront it face to face.